Welcome into Basketball by Association. My name be Arky, he be Joel. Joel, how be ye?
Me fail English, that's impossible.
Mhm.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 78 of Basketball by Association. If you're listening on Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, welcome in. We're glad to have you aboard. If you're watching on the old YouTube, thank you. And if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, please give us a like, a share, a subscribe, all that stuff. Hit the little dingy bell, all that. And of course, Arky Shea, episode 78. No player in NBA history has ever worn number 78. So
really, we got to a vacant number.
we
again.
did.
Yeah,
And,
right.
you know, I was tempted to make this part 2 of the Andrea Bargnani memorial episode because we got him last
Is
time.
He dead?
Well, I mean, his NBA career is, but
R.I.P.
you know, I'm in good spirits, and you actually wore an NBA shirt today to
look
the
at that.
NBA taping. I'm gonna give props. You showed up in a Knicks shirt. I can live with that. So we're gonna go big. We're gonna go big with episode 78. In that, we're gonna choose the MVP from the year 1978. He was a big, and he was destined for big things. He was already an NBA champion by this point, one time over, and it looked like he was set to potentially rule the league for at least the next 5 years or so. But in this year where he won MVP, he only plays 50 some games, and the narrative changes forever around his career because there's big trouble. You want to take a guess of who we're talking about, although he is still one of the most well-known NBA personalities around?
Oh, okay. All right. So 78, well-known personality, injury that season. Who?
And he was a big himself.
He's a big himself. Who's still well known from 78 that isn't like a that's a that's a I'm drawing a who would that be?
Well, here's your next clue. He's got a kid who's coaching in the league right now.
Bruh, I'm drawing a blank, man.
All right. This here is the Bill Walton episode.
Whoa! Hey! Okay.
So we're going with Big Red, his
all
lead
those
nickname.
Clues make sense now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You know, this was a guy who coming into the league looked
he was
like
MVP in 78?
He was MVP in 78, despite the fact that he only appeared in 58 games because there's the foot injury, and then he doesn't play the entire following year. You know, this is a Derrick Rose level story when you think about it. Bill Walton was 25 when the foot break occurs. He had been an all-star twice. He had been a champion once with the Blazers the year before in 76-77. And after breaking that foot, he does not appear with the Blazers ever again. He comes back with the San Diego Clippers for 14 games in 79 and 80. He's out the next 2 years again with foot issues. Appears 33 games in 82, 83 for the Clippers, got 55 in with the Clippers in 83, 84, and then did 67 games. So Shea was healthy. And then, of course, his final 2 seasons are with those Boston Celtics, where he is one of the greatest bench, spark plugs of all time. Just so overqualified for what they were asking him to do and really supercharge that Celtics team. And then, the foot injury comes back again at age 35. He doesn't play the final season, and he is out of the league. So his career numbers don't look all that impressive. 13 points, 10 boards, 3.5 assists, but there's a few down years. When you look at those first 5 seasons, and especially what he did during the Blazers championship year, this was a guy where people were going, all right, it's going to be Kareem's league and it's going to be Bill Walton's league. Magic and Larry haven't shown up yet, and he was supposed to be the next big thing.
So I started thinking while you were bringing that up, so listen, we're going to get to the Atlantic today, and there's several big stories coming out of the Atlantic, and so we'll get to those in the midst of talking about the Atlantic because it is the drama division. It is the one that that's going to have the stuff happening, at least early on in the season.
You got so many big markets in it, it's almost inevitable to an extent, right? And they've just happened to be that way. right now.
That's a good point. And the West Coast is pretty quiet right now as far as this kind of storyline. So I was starting to think, if you were to put together a top 10 list for you, and you don't have to give me any type of order, but do you think Bill Walton in the top 10 list of what we saw on the court for a time versus what could have been moments, right? It's like another one of those what if, but we actually saw something before the what if. Do you think he's in that top 10 list for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill Walton is just slightly before my time. So I didn't get a chance to like see him actually play. It's always been the videos and then hearing some of the older guys talk about him. But Bill Walton's got to be on that list. Derrick Rose, Grant Hill, Penny Hardaway. Trying to think who my fifth guy would be. We're probably, having to dial it back quite a ways. I think Pistol Pete gets on that list because injuries caught up to him way too early. That's another one that's kind of before our time, but you get the legend of those guys. So I think those might be my top five. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody in here, but
can I have an honorable mention, at least if he doesn't make the top 10 for Larry Bird? Because of like he's already legend status and he's all-time great, Hall of Fame, blah blah blah. But if he didn't have that back injury and that back issue, like there could be some like we may not. Larry Bird may come up and should come up a lot more in the upper 1% that have ever played this league, upper 1% of the 1%. Maybe if his career wasn't sort of hampered by
Yeah, if you want to go that route of guys that showed us something for a while and we just didn't get it as long as we probably should have, Isaiah Thomas, right? Because he's got the major injury and then isn't right. His career is a lot shorter than it should have been. And a lot of this has to do with modern medicine versus back then. You suffer one of these career injuries and it is your career. And so Bird's back, Isaiah Thomas, Dominique Wilkins is another one with the blown Achilles.
That's a good one.
You probably could have gotten a few more seasons out of him. And you got to think that like all three of those players were good enough and just wanted to win that they probably, had they been healthy, would have been dynamite bench veterans for some, big title contending team. You'd like to think it would have been with their original because they stayed home their entire career. So you'd like to think it was with the Hawks and the Celtics and the Pistons. But even if still, if they bounced somewhere in the last year or two of their career, you got to think they would have been really effective with how smart those three guys were and just how, unbelievably talented and gifted.
But I do want to break down the Atlantic Division because it is the home of your future NBA champion New York Knicks. As you can see here on the jersey, we don't pop the collar because we're not wearing a collar today. We're popping the jersey. Okay, it's a shirt. I'll admit it's a shirt. In fact, it's a little warm for me wearing such a long sleeve, but I like this shirt so much. It's why I'm wearing it for the pod. It's such a fresh looking clean. You got to admit, Joel, this logo is pretty legit. Okay, Joel, you got to stop talking.
The Knicks have always been, like, to me, one of the most boring logos out there. Same thing with the Clippers. Like, oh, cool, you have a basketball with your team name on it. The Pistons were kind of the same way. Everybody, of course, hates on the teal Pistons with the flaming horse, but at least it was something more than just a basketball in your name.
You should go look at, and you probably have, how many logos of basketball teams have a basketball in the logo.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like
but a lot of them do some sort of spin off of that, like, pun intended. They spin the ball a little bit.
I bet you're one of those guys that likes the Heat logo.
The flaming basketball?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? Because they did something with it.
they set it on fire, Joel. That's what
give me something, New York. Like, turn it into an apple, put some skyscrapers coming out of it. Like, just give me something. I know, like, Knicks is such a weird and old name when you think about it. And I got no problem with that because it is a classic. But there isn't a lot that you can do with it, again, outside of, like, some creepy old white dude dribbling a basketball. And the Sixers have kind of taken that over with the Ben Franklin secondary logo. So, the Nuggets had that for a while as well in the 70s.
Yeah, listen, unless you're Jason Williams, if you're white, just don't dribble the ball on the court. That's all. I might allow Luka, but he's got more heft to his heritage than Jason Williams. So, there you go. Or sorry, Ben Franklin, I should say. Ben Franklin special. I don't need that guy on a logo. Jason
Just-
Williams. Let's put Jay Will on a logo. How about that?
Let's make Jay Will the logo.
Okay. All right. I see what you're doing.
All right, but anyway, let's we got to talk about the Atlantic, or we're gonna get way off topic here.
We don't have to really, to be honest with you. I mean, we've already announced that the Knicks are going to win the division, the Atlantic Division. But I mean, I guess we can, for sake of finishing the rest of it, we can talk about the division. So I guess it's fair to say that we can talk about the big stories of the day at the top of this chart too, because the team that won this division a year ago is the team that also won the Eastern Conference as far as the top overall seed. And that's the Philadelphia 76ers. It is a beyond official as today, media as we're recording this is media day as we're recording this on Monday. And Ben Simmons did not show up for training camp as he said he would not do. This was very
shocked
clear.
and appalled.
Shocked,
and
stunned, appalled, flabbergasted. I think some people were. But Ben Simmons definitely making his case to be removed from the franchise and to be sent somewhere else. Did you see the moment where Joel Embiid was asked the question, if Ben Simmons had taken your calls and showed up here, what would you have said to him?
I did not see that.
He was asked that question, and I'm not joking, Joel, when there was a full 8 seconds of him just thinking. It was just, what would I say to him? Like it lasted a long time. And then he said, I would probably say, like it just continued. like
that's because internally, and Embiid doesn't do this often, but internally he was censoring like everything that crossed his mind.
That's right.
And usually he's pretty freely spoken, but it's media day and you don't want to start off the season dropping F-bombs all over the place. You save that for post game.
Right. He was like, I would say, can't say that. Can't say that.
That'll get me fined.
Think that's going to cost me money. I would say, let's get to work. Okay, so Ben Simmons, in the case that we've sort of alluded to throughout the offseason, that he's not coming back to the Philadelphia 76ers. It seems like now that it's media day, it's more upon us. But do you think the Philadelphia 76ers, it is sort of dependent upon what they get, I understand. But let's just take Ben Simmons off the court and out of the starting lineup now. And just you can pick somebody to go in his place. Can Philadelphia be better cohesion-wise without a Ben Simmons on the court with Joel Embiid and them two sort of, fighting for space and ball?
No, absolutely not. We're assuming that they're going to get useful players in return, and then we can answer that question about better or worse with Simmons out. But if he's just out and we don't have a return yet, the answer is absolutely not. Yes, it was not a perfect fit, but Simmons is still a gap filler in so many ways, except for shooting, right? There isn't anything else he does poorly. And Embiid is a 5-tool NBA center where, you wish, sometimes he wouldn't settle for threes, but he still hits them at a respectable enough clip and does absolutely everything. So, the Sixers, they're not in trouble, they're going to miss the playoffs or anything without Simmons. I think Shake Milton and Tyrese Maxey, they're going to give you something at that point guard spot. Seth Curry and frickin' Korkmaz have the shooting guard spot down. You got Danny Green and Matthijs Thybulle at the other wing spot. Tobias Harris is fine. I've never loved Tobias Harris's game, but he's fine as a starting NBA power forward. This will give him more looks, but he's just not a guy I've ever wanted to rely too heavily on. And then, my goodness, you've got Embiid backed up by Andre Drummond at the center spot. So Philadelphia still is a playoff team and a tough out, but without a replacement for Ben Simmons, even if it's 75 cents on the dollar, like they're not a championship contender with the fact that Brooklyn is, who they are, and Milwaukee is still in this mix. And then you got Atlanta up and coming, and a couple of the other teams that we've talked about so far and yet to talk about. So good team, not a great team. unless, Embiid gives us an MVP caliber year and is healthy the entire season. We've never seen that before.
What do we think that, you and I were both very high on the Sixers going into the playoffs last season, and I will still think deservedly so. What do you think that we need, or Philadelphia? Now I'm kind of invested because I really thought really highly of them, so I kind of don't want them to screw all this up without me being right at least once about them. What do you think Philadelphia needs to be able to get over that hump and to get out of the Eastern Conference? What don't they have right now?
I think they need young X Factor legs who play with fearlessness, because Simmons has been good at playing a pace for them, driving, setting up Embiid, setting up other teammates for easy baskets. But we know that there's been a lack of fearlessness at times. So Simmons provided energy in a lot of really good ways. And you need to be able to reduplicate some of that. But there's got to be that guy who really doesn't have a conscience about taking big shots, making big shots. Somebody that's going to tie into Embiid, right? Embiid plays with a lot of fire. He gets under people's skins. He wants to be an agitator. He wants to be great. His body hasn't always held up for him, but Philadelphia really has been trying to trend towards being a tough blue collar type of team, but Simmons hasn't fit that mold in enough ways, or at least in the big moments. And that's why some of these, teams, the names that are coming up, Minnesota is in there. A guy like Malik Beasley's name is getting thrown around. Portland with CJ McCollum at the very least, if you can't get Damian Lillard, who would be even better. But if it's just McCollum, then you're probably getting Robert Covington back in a Sixers uniform, and some other pieces in there as well. Like, those are good starts. If you could somehow pry away, this has been a pipe dream of mine. If you could somehow pry away Paul George from the Clippers, I would do that, even though he's flawed and has had motor issues sometimes. But I think more often than not, Paul George has done the right thing and been the right player. Cleveland is the dark horse name that is coming up in this. And while Colin Sexton would be very interesting, because I think he does play without that conscience, it is a question about whether he overlaps too much with what you're trying to figure out in Shake Milton and Tyrese Maxey. And if you're not certain that they're a franchise everyday starter, then maybe you try to roll the dice and with Sexton and whatever you can get out of Cleveland. I don't think that one makes sense for either party, because what are the chances that Simmons stays there? But that's kind of the problem in Minnesota too. If Simmons gets there and they're not a playoff team, you got major problems, because now you might be losing Ben Simmons and Karl Anthony Towns. But the same thing could happen in Cleveland. So there's some names out there. The issue with this is Simmons is supposedly given his short list of teams that he wants to go to. And of course, they're going to be contenders in warm weather states. It's like, bruh, those teams don't need you. They might not want you, and they can't afford to get you without messing up what they've already got. Like, it's a non-starter unless you're the Warriors or the Clippers really taking a risk that it just doesn't seem in their best interest to take that risk.
I have a short list of people I can be traded for to places. One of them is Hawaii. I will only go play for Hawaii or podcast for Hawaii, other than it here.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, and this one may surprise you, Acapulco. So, I'm in an interesting. Like, listen, if you don't want to trade me, don't trade me. That's fine. I'll play here. But if you're going to trade me, I want to go contend somewhere warm and nice.
I hear the Flint Tropics are still looking for bodies. Here's a quick question for you, not to get too far into a tangent, but Kyrie Irving kind of played some of these shenanigans a few years ago, and he got on your no-fly list and has remained there for a while as, a knucklehead in your mind. And you and I have gone back and forth on this. With what's gone on with Ben Simmons. By the way,
we'll go back there in just about 2 minutes.
With Ben Simmons, is he kind of on that list for you, or is this a different situation? Because, the franchise didn't really back him up, but then again, he had really faded in just one of the biggest meltdowns we've ever seen.
Yes, so like for me, like he's not on that sort of no-fly list. He feels to me like the great potential that we see glimpses of, but we don't know if he's truly going to be able to find a fit that really maximizes what we think Ben Simmons can be, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like Andrew Wiggins, another number 1 pick, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison. Yeah. Then, like, sure, there's a ton of talent there and he could be really good. Can you build a team around him? I don't know if you could build a team around him. He's a great piece, but for what team? And for what coach and what style and what system? And does a 6'10", 6'11" dude bringing up the like he's a really talented novelty, right? But I don't know where the fit is really that's going to make everyone just ooh and ah. Like you just sort of keep paying him based on potential, hoping something clicks somewhere. But honestly, like I was thinking about it this last weekend after the college football game Saturday night when I was trying to just decompress and get ready for the show. It's like where would I would say is a perfect spot right now for him. And honestly, I think you could make a case for him playing a whole bunch of places. But like, is it getting the most out of Ben Simmons? I mean, I don't know. I don't sort of see him as a malcontent, so to speak. I just sort of see him as an odd fit.
I've got 3 places that I think work because we don't know what they're building yet, and they've got some talent to build around them, but all 3 are pretty lousy teams at this point. So
Okay.
he would have to check his ego enough to realize that, look, if you forced yourself away from a ready-made contender, you're going to have to take a few steps back win-wise. So I look at the Houston Rockets and the wings that they've got there, the fact that they don't really have a settled point guard situation, and it's very malleable what they could put around him and give up. Similarly, the Orlando Magic, we have no idea what the Magic are going to become. We know there's some talent, there's some length there, but it's just, again, it's a clean slate, and I think that's the type of scenario that he's going to do well in. The other one to me then is the Washington Wizards. You got big guys up front, but Denny Avdija and Rui Hachimura can both shoot. Obviously, if you're bringing on Ben Simmons, you're probably losing Bradley Beal. You would have to imagine Beal winds up in a Sixers uniform or part of a 3-team deal with that. But Washington at that point is clearly going into a rebuild. And now you've got, again, what you think would be a cornerstone. And you know how it didn't work with Joel Embiid and Simmons, and you can avoid that in building something new. None of those 3 teams have a guy at center who is completely untouchable and who does the exact same things that Embiid does. They're a little more mobile, they're a little less talented, but I think you could work with that. There's a few other teams out there, like I think the fit in Minnesota could be interesting. The fit in Cleveland is possible. Portland is really intriguing to me, but it doesn't sound like Damian Lillard's ready to go yet. Probably one more season there of trying this out. So those 3 would be my dark horses.
I think Houston is a really interesting potential spot. And again, we're all just fantasy at this point, right? Just if he were to go somewhere. Because I think you did use the perfect word when you said malleable, right? Like I think that offense and that roster can kind of sort of like it could be whatever I shouldn't say we, but it could be whatever we whatever we
yeah.
want it to be, right? Like it could be whatever we want it to be. And if you had a Ben Simmons type guy or just Ben Simmons on your roster, like now we're kind of cooking with a little bit of gas, right? Like we don't know quite what we would be, but we could be a little something, right?
Yeah, because I look at the amount of slashers and shot makers, and yeah, they're young outside of Eric Gordon. They're real young, and it's going to be sloppy at times, but why not have a guy who is one of the better delivery systems in basketball? And I use that term for somebody like Rajon Rondo, too. I've always called him that. Rajon Rondo was a delivery system. He's going to get the ball to the right player at the right time. There's going to be issues if you're asking him to score too much and so forth. But Ben Simmons is a fantastic defender. He's a great rebounder. he just doesn't want to shoot the ball. But I'm pretty sure if you're somehow able to keep Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green, those two guys are going to be like, so you tell me you don't want to shoot the ball, eh? I think I can help you out with that, and Ben Simmons, like, that would be a good fit. Plus, again, if you're able to keep Christian Wood, so this is absolutely fantasy. I have no idea who they'd be giving up in a deal like this. It'd be a crap ton of picks, and Philly's going to need something a little more ready-made than just picks and Eric Gordon. But you're able to keep those type of guys around, young athletes who they've got to get polished a little bit more, the rough edges. But when you've got a veteran at this point getting you the ball, and he's a big veteran and he is a good defender too, like, you could really supercharge that offense awfully quick, even if they give up a crap ton of points on the other end for a couple of years.
Right, and literally, like, we like to talk about the team's offseason moves, besides Andre Drummond, who you alluded to earlier, actually mentioned earlier, like, Ben Simmons would be this entire offseason. Like, whatever happens with Ben Simmons, when it happens, because something will happen with Ben Simmons, that will be their whole offseason, how we can sort of judge where they go going forward. So, kind of with Philadelphia right now, we're at a little bit of an incomplete as we're recording.
And regardless of what they get back for Simmons, barring injuries, Brooklyn is the front runner in the division. There's no way they're not. And even if Embiid gives you an MVP caliber season again, it will be an absolute surprise if Philly wins the Atlantic. It's just the way it is. Like, and they're going to have a dogfight with the Knicks, I think, too.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets, who still technically employ Mr. Kyrie Irving, who did not go to Media Day on Monday because of New York City protocol for COVID-19. He is not vaccinated. It apparently is unclear, but it seems to be a very clear sign that if you're not allowed to go, whether or not he was going to go or not, to Media Day, that he's not very keen of the COVID-19 protocol. So much so that Rolling Stone did a piece, Joel, and I sent you, I'm sure you've read this by now, where not just Kyrie Irving, there's a very interesting piece by him, but many of the players who are unvaccinated are trying to get some type of possibility of, if you're not allowed to play in certain states and cities because of their COVID protocols, because they are unvaccinated, that maybe they try to work out something where they only play their home games or the games where they can actually play. So essentially, potentially half the season, or maybe even less of that, depending on where they go and play. Before we get to the Kyrie specific part, we're very early on in that, and a lot of things can sort of change. But the idea, Joel, of players, because of the COVID-19 vaccine and not wanting to get it, being okay with just playing at most half the season, what does that say to you about those type of players and where we are? And how do you personally feel about that?
This ties into, I guess, my personal feelings, and that's all they are, my personal feelings on vaccines. I was skeptical early on, like a lot of people, because things were getting rushed to development and, you don't know side effects and all that sort of thing. But I also feel like we're at this point where we've had a track record. We've had a lot of data points. And yes, it's not perfect because nothing is. And yes, we don't have a 10 or 15 year like longitudinal study to know every single outcome. So I get why people might still be skeptical. But at the same time, a lot of that skepticism at this point is being driven by conspiracy theories, faulty science, and just plain flat out lies and or selfishness. Because a lot of times the people who refuse vaccines at this point, and this is anecdotal, but my observation has been in the general public sector, those that refuse vaccines are the same ones who are refusing to wear a mask or carping about it to high heavens. And it goes back to this idea that they don't believe they should be told what to do under any circumstances, and anybody else's health and anybody else's outcome be damned, because their personal individual freedom is bigger than everyone else. There is a word for that. It's called selfishness. It's just flat out selfishness, and it gets exposed whenever people in this camp start running their mouth too often. Like it just pops out and you see it exactly for what it is. I don't know exactly Kyrie Irving's hesitation and his skepticism. I don't know the sources that are in his ear, whether they be, reasonable concerns that people still have, because I certainly give room for that, like I said, or whether it's based on this conspiracy theory nonsense that just is a plague within our country right now. I don't know. But again, you're on a team that's chasing a championship. Yes, your health comes first. We applauded, LaMarcus Aldridge when he retired last year with the heart issue. He could have chased a ring, but he didn't put himself at risk. So I understand, Kyrie Irving, if you are saying, I don't want to put myself at risk for whatever reason. That is ultimately your choice, sort of. But to me, if you are going to sit this season out because of COVID protocols and you are not going to get vaccinated, to me, you draw the hard line. Okay, you don't want to play for half of the games. Guess what? You don't play for any of the games. You're suspended without pay for the rest of the season. You're not out of your contract. You can come back. In fact, it might even be we keep you under contract for an extra year, however they want to negotiate that. But you don't want to play along with the rules that state laws are being passed. This is part of your job at this point. And coming and going, picking and choosing the games you want, like, if vaccination is truly that hill that you want to die on, no pun intended, then okay, we're not going to play this game. Then you're just out the whole way. This is literally trying to have your cake and eat it too. And I get if somebody wants to take a moral or health standpoint at this point, a stance, but it's going to hurt if you do. And companies are allowed to mandate the rules and regulations that you have to follow to be employed there. And guess what? Vaccination can be one of those, especially in states that have already passed laws about this sort of thing. Like, it's time for us to give up the skepticism and just like roll with this, because this is the way it is. And stop bitching about masks then if you're anti-vaccination. Like, you can't choose both and then complain that COVID's not over. You are the problem at this point.
So Kyrie, the source of this sort of comes from his aunt, who runs his foundation, and was quoted in the Rolling Stone piece, alluding to the fact that Kyrie and many others may consider an option if the NBA gives it to them. And really, it's sort of NBA team, will they let me do this? And also, how much of my money and my contract can I keep if I just willingly sit out because I won't do this one protocol thing? That if they don't want to get the vaccination, then maybe they play just the games in places where they can play. And there are no state and city regulations to mandate a vaccine or mask coverings, etc. I think if at nothing else, if some of these players, and I think the article quoted somewhere around, I think like there may be like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 60 players who may still be unvaccinated at this point. If some of those players, and Kyrie's included in this very, very, very much so, because he's on a preeminent team to be able to win it this year. That at the very minimum of all this extremely damages your team. Like, it takes away a whole heck of a lot of thought in my mind that this team could be cohesive the entire season if it's just in and out, in and out, in and out, and B, would even have enough horses to be in the top 2 or 3 of this conference if, again, you're giving up one of the preeminent ball handlers that we've seen in the last 10, 15 years at the very minimum, because he made this decision. And again, if that's the hill you want to die on, not meaning to make the pun, but die on it then, right? Like, just don't play.
Exactly. Because to demand that you get to come back and forth means that the team is constantly making 2 different game plans, that practices are different, the starting lineup is different. You are jerking around somebody who's earned your roster spot during the time that you're not playing because you choose not to. And then they're sitting off and on. So there is no cohesion. What about when the playoffs happen? You're just going to sit out playoff series? Like, it's better to be all in or all out and allow this team to then build as if you had a season-ending injury. And in that case, I do think they have enough horses, even without Kyrie, if it is cohesive, because James Harden becomes your primary ball handler. We know that he can handle that load. And then you've got Patty Mills as a secondary shooter. Patty Mills is just as devastating from outside as Kyrie Irving is. You've got Javon Carter as another point guard in that mix. Joe Harris, Bruce Brown, and so on. And they've got more bodies up front this year than they have in the past. You probably got to play Paul Millsap a little more and Sekou Doumbouya, a youngster, but they've got plenty of depth. It's the cohesion part that really gets me, because now you had an avoidable situation. Last year's injuries and the trades, somewhat unavoidable. And 2 years ago, as we were just starting to see this team come together, injuries again, unavoidable. This year, it is an avoidable issue. Either get vaccinated or don't, but then sit and let this team go chase a championship. And you know what? If you chose to sit, I don't think you're getting a ring if they win. Like, you didn't help.
I don't think you're getting a ring. Like, if Kyrie's going to be out the whole season, there's a chance that they'll be deep into the playoffs and they'll be a really good team. I know Kyrie just sort of makes it feel like it's well over the top. Like, I thought James Harden coming over was going to put the team well over the top. And then, of course, we saw what happened with the injuries last season. If you don't know what your lineup is from night to night, and you can sort of project, hey, California has this, so this road trip, we can have them for like 2 of the 4 games or whatever. Like if you just have to keep going back and forth like that, just sit home, man. Like, just don't be around the team. Some of them want to get vaccinated. Some of them are vaccinated. Most of them are vaccinated. Just go home. Just go home. Don't get paid, by the way, because you're not doing anything for it. It's not like you're at least trying to be an ambassador for the team. Go raise some money for some gubernatorial candidates, or just do whatever you want to do. It's not going to be basketball, because we can't count on at the max 41 games out of the season, even though you're technically would be available for 82.
And worst case scenario, if the team allows this.
Sorry, let me just add this.
Yeah.
How much different is the vaccine thought going to be next year, right? It's just 1 more year. Is that enough? How many years does someone like Kyrie Irving need to sort of be proven that he is okay with this vaccine?
Right. And it's tough with Kyrie because of who we've seen him be. And it's not fair to try to put like motives into people's, mouths and that sort of thing. But is this skepticism over the efficacy and effectiveness, side effects of the vaccine, that sort of thing, or is this tying more into, hey, nobody tells me what to do?
Right.
And that's we don't know, but we've seen Kyrie bristle under those circumstances. I was just going to say, at the very worst, if the league and the team allows this to happen, if I'm Steve Nash, there is no way in hell that Kyrie Irving is a starter for my team at all this year. Kyrie Irving is a bench player. He's a spark plug with the second unit. Some nights I'll have him, some nights I won't, but I will solidify my starting lineup with guys that I know are there, because I'm looking for my closing group in the playoffs. And yes, Kyrie Irving might still wind up being in that if you cross your fingers and he's in a playoff series where it's a team that he personally chooses to be allowed to play against. That's just where it gets so tough.
Kyrie likes basketball. He doesn't love it. Kyrie likes to be on a team playing. He doesn't have to have it. Kyrie not even all in during games, right? Like he's not all in with the team whenever he does play. And you're right. If this seems less to me like a vaccine issue more than you're telling me I have to do this issue? No, I got enough money. I don't have to be doing this issue.
It's hard to say. And it's...
But that's...
Kyrie's given us reasonable doubt, right? He's given us reasonable doubt over the years. That's all we can say on it.
I'm just going by his track history, right? Mm-hmm. Like he literally missed the final game of an Eastern Conference semifinal or final because he wanted to go have surgery like a few hours earlier. Like... You want to do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. And when you go somewhere that has a little more structure than that, and has a little more issues with you just being able to do whatever you want to do. The NBA, it's the best league to possibly let you do whatever you want to do, but even they have some rules, and most of these aren't even NBA rules. They're state mandates and stuff. The NBA has to work by beside them. But it's clear to me, like the reason he's making decisions like this is because anything that impedes upon his freedom of wanting to do things and makes him do something, he doesn't want to do it. He bristles, as you said, he bristles at the idea of, oh, you think I have to do that? No, I don't. No, I don't. I don't have to think the earth is round. I don't have to, not show up in fundraisers while I'm on COVID protocol from the team. No, I don't have to show up here for my team, who, even though I'm I should sort of be here with the team, but no, I'm just going to go get my my nasal search. No, I don't have to sign this contract, even though I told everybody on day one I was going to extend at the end of the year. No, like, it's just every time you put him into a corner, he just says no. So
I will say this about the Nets before we move on, and we mentioned this as they were making some of these signings. They are specifically built to battle the Bucks this year. We saw during their playoff series against them, they ran out of bodies. A lot of that was injury issues. Some of that was youth and roster construction issue, especially after LaMarcus Aldridge had retired mid-season. But having gotten Aldridge back, Nick Claxton has another year under his belt. Blake Griffin is still there, and Griffin gave them some phenomenally effective minutes. Durant is still there. We saw Durant play a lot of defense on Giannis and do just fine. Paul Millsap is added. That's a guy who is there specifically to pick up fouls and to hound Giannis. Same thing with James Johnson. You get some young legs and length in Sekou Doumbouya, who they just stole from the Pistons, essentially, as a prospect. So I've just named like 7 different bodies, in addition to some minutes from Bruce Brown, who's way undersized, but is such a pesky defender. Like 7-8 guys that they have to specifically throw at Giannis. It's very clear that they know where their weakness was. We all saw it, and we all know that had they had a couple more bodies, they probably would have won that series, because Milwaukee struggled until that very end and then did just enough to get past a Nets team that was running on Kevin Durant and nothing else by the very end. So yeah. You add a healthy James Harden, you add that depth. That's why I say, and a proven winner like Patty Mills, not only at the NBA level, but the international level, a guy who is fearless at shooting the ball in big situations and just gunning whenever he has to. Like, you add that all into this mix, and that's why I think they got a shot even without Kyrie Irving. It's a better shot if they don't have him the entire time versus having him only part of the time. The ideal, of course, is that Kyrie goes, you know what? I guess I'll get vaccinated. Let's go play. That's the ideal. I don't think that's going to happen.
So we've gotten through 2 teams in this division.
Yeah, we've got to speed this up.
Next are my New York Knicks. Surprisingly, drama-free this offseason, right? Like, that is, if you were going to say any team in this division was going to be full of drama, just pull a name out of a hat. 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to be the Knicks with how bad they've been, and some of the really bad deals that they've made, but not necessarily the case at all this offseason. In fact, I don't know if you know this, guys, but I'm a Knicks fan. Okay, so I'm gonna keep this very PG, but I really like what's happened in the offseason. Again, the Knicks aren't a destination place yet, but this offseason, Evan Fournier's on that team. Derrick Rose is re-signed to that team. The 74-year-old Derrick Rose, by the way, who you've already mentioned. Kemba Walker is now part of this team on a very cheap deal, which is the reason I like that even more. And this is a team that obviously was in the playoffs, was in the top 4 and hosted playoff series last season against the Hawks. I think they got another run in them, possibly Mr. Joel Cordes. I think this offseason, for what the Knicks sort of are right now, which isn't the sexy spot yet, but still a good, a very above average team, it's a pretty nice offseason for New York.
It's solid. And you look at the couple of moves they made and you say, is Kemba Walker an upgrade over Elfrid Payton? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, regardless of contract, regardless of knee, he's not going to play at an all-star level. No one's expecting that out of him. I didn't love the deal because it means fewer minutes for Emmanuel quickly, and this just feels like another classic Tom Thibodeau underestimating his young guy sort of thing. But the fact that Derrick Rose now is capable of not just playing point guard, we've seen him play both shooting guard and small forward even a little bit, and kind of plugging him in wherever it needs. And the fact that Kemba Walker is guaranteed to miss some games. And yes, Tom Thibodeau does not like to load manage players. He doesn't like to rest players, but he can't be stupid in the case of Kemba Walker. When you've got Emmanuel Quickley and Derrick Rose, you just play Kemba when Kemba's feeling good, and you don't overtax him. You keep him there for the playoffs, and you've got different pitchers. I don't think any of these three pitchers at the point guard position are dominating guys, but they're all different looks, and you can work with it, especially when you have Julius Randle and his ability to bring the ball down. RJ Barrett and Randle should both be a year better with, that much more experience. Mitchell Robinson hopefully is healthy enough to come back, but you got serviceable minutes out of Nerlens Noel. I don't know how much longer Taj Gibson can keep giving you minutes like that, but we have said that for like 10 years. So, he's there at least. Are they going to get anything out of Obi Toppin and Kevin Knox? The hope is still there.
Hope more for Obi Toppin, I think, at this point. I think how long you've been in with Kevin Knox is sort of like he is what he is at this point, right? Like I don't know. I will not give up on him because I still personally really thought he was going to be something out of the draft. I may give up on him after he's retired and just say, okay, it was over. He didn't do, but like it sort of smells like you just got what you got with him, and it's the hope can stay there all you want, but it's much more with Obi Toppin right now than it is with Kevin Knox. I think this is another playoff contending team. I think the poor man's MVP and Julius Randle last year earned some big time money with that play. I think it was well earned. He carried that team a lot last year. And if you talk about how well they started the season and how many times you would see double doubles put up by that guy, it was just insane. Like the first 3.5, 4 months of the season, it was like every night done. Double, 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 like 20 and 10, 20 and 14, 24 and 17. Like it was just this weird, hey, where did this Julius Randle come from? Because as we've alluded to on this podcast, he was almost out of the league, and the fact that he came back to be that effective, he worked on his shot. He did a lot. He got in better shape, and he was really good last year. I hope this is one of those he gets figured out because his postseason end was not very romantic. It was kind of disappointing, from a guy who sort of fallen in love with Julius Randle, not just the performance, but the way he acted on the court too. I hope that there's less of that in him this season and more of what we saw throughout the majority of the season. And if so, I think the Knicks have had a fine offseason, a pretty solid. I think that's a fair thing to say. I would even say pretty good considering all the guys that were out there, which weren't a ton. And that they would have fit for New York, and New York would have even gotten. I think this offseason has been nice.
I was just going to say, I think you hit the nail on the head with Randle, and it filters down to the rest of the team. It's going to come down to their attitude.
Yeah.
Are you content with what you did last year and think that just by showing back up again that you'll be able to do it all over? You got a couple of bigger names, or not bigger names, but you got a couple of names added into the list. Evan Fournier is not a difference maker anymore at this point in his career. He hasn't been in quite a few years.
Reclamation.
But he's a usable player, and he does a little bit of everything. So I got no problem with adding Evan Fournier, and him and Alec Burks. What you're getting out of those minutes, and it might not be difference maker minutes, but that's okay. That's what RJ Barrett and Julius Randle are for, and what Derrick Rose in certain situations is for. So it's fine. But it is going to come down to, now that Julius Randle got his money, was he content this offseason? Because what happens is if you're content and you come in, Tom Thibodeau is going to grind and grate at you mercilessly, and you're going to hate that guy with everything you've got. And that's where I think teams have fallen off, because the Knicks were hungry. They had been beaten down for a bunch of years. Tom Thibodeau comes in, and I'm sure was annoying as all get out early in the season. But when it started to work and people bought in, now you put up with all of Thibodeau's communication foibles and his inflexibility, and you put up with that because he's getting you wins.
Yeah.
But that was because the players bought in and played with that chip on their shoulder and were flying around and had that defensive identity. If you've got that again, and that's who you are, and Julius Randle is that type of a leader, and RJ Barrett is that type of leader, and they don't need the veterans anymore to tell them to do that. They're the ones telling the veterans now, this is the way we roll in New York. Like, if you've got that, you're going to be in good shape, and Tom Thibodeau is going to be just fine, and it's going to work. And like you said, that's a very successful season waiting to happen. But if you were content at all, it is very possible to underachieve despite the fact you have a better roster than last year, because the Knicks didn't get by on their talent. They got by on those intangibles. And intangibles, it's right in that word. It's very hard to keep a hold of that sometimes, and so easy to lose it.
So since we talked about the Eastern Conference champions just now, let's move on to the rest, I guess. The Boston Celtics are next on the list. Finished fourth in the division last season. Ime Udoka, a brand new coach, brand new GM, or at least a guy in Brad Stevens who went from coach to GM.
Mm-hmm.
Still want to hear the rest of that story because there's something behind that. I don't think it was just a super easy like Danny Ainge is gone, Brad Stevens GM, no longer coach.
I think Brad Stevens is smart enough to know that he was losing the locker room and to know what happens when you lose an NBA locker room. And if he hadn't fully lost it, he could see the writing on the wall, and he was smart enough to know to walk out of that situation.
I don't hate the idea that this could also be a softer landing spot in time for if a college team that he wants come calling.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to leave a team as a GM than it is to leave it as the coach in the middle of the season. So, again, we'll see how that goes. I would like to see more reading on that. I don't think you're far off in what you said. But the Celtics also got Al Horford, Josh Richardson, Enes Kanter is on that list.
Dennis Schroeder.
I forgot Dennis Schroeder is on that list. A team that was extremely underwhelming, as we have alluded to before. Kemba Walker is no longer on that team. And Joel, it's the young guys team now. It's excuse me, two guys that we've given a lot of love to on this pod, their team. But I don't know what really this team is going to be this season.
I don't think anybody does, and that's both scary and potentially promising. You talk about intangibles, and Boston just seems to have lacked that for a couple of years, right? There was some talent. They would put together some good runs during the season. Then they would also put together just head-scratching runs where the fire wasn't there. The chemistry, the camaraderie didn't seem to be there. Guys were alluding to it. They shuffled the deck some, but
I thought you were going to say like with the type of roster they put on the court. No, you mean overall. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, the key guys are still there. It's still Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum, Marcus Smart, and now Robert Williams III. So you make the assumption that any of those four guys weren't really the problem. That's the hope. Because if any of them were, and they're still there, you might have a similar result. We know all four can play. Josh Richardson has been a reclamation project now in a couple of different spots, and we're starting to get a little bit worried. But decent defender and a backcourt of him with Marcus Smart and Jaylen Brown, like, you can get after some people defensively, and you can switch for days with that, especially with Robert Williams protecting the paint. And, Jayson Tatum is fine enough on the defensive end. The Dennis Schroeder signing, of course, was questionable. You got him for a decent price.
It's clear, like, you got him for $1.50. So
right, and it's clearly a rental, but this is a guy who lost out on a ton of money, and it's very possible, like we saw with a Julius Randle, that contract year Dennis Schroeder could be something really amazing as he's trying to make that money back that he lost. the downside of that is if you have a season going south, a guy like that can start playing selfish real quick and only for his numbers, and then winds up torpedoing everything else positive that you're trying to do. Al Horford being brought back, fine, good enough. Al Horford's a good guy. He's still serviceable, but if he's not a difference maker by any means. Enes Kanter gives you a different look than Robert Williams. He gets offensive rebounds. He can finish a play.
Enes Kanter, by the way, very pro-vax.
And this is his second go round with the Celtics.
Yeah.
Including
his first
with this
one didn't
younger
go that
group.
great. His first one did so.
It wasn't horrible. It wasn't. It was fine.
Yeah,
It's Robert Williams' team now, but the fact that you've got some options. There are certain nights that Al Horford is going to make sense. There's going to be other nights where Enes Kanter makes sense, or that you go small ball and you get Grant Williams in there. They've got Juan Hernangomez and Jabari Parker also in this mix. So Bruno Fernando's another guy that I think can play. He's bounced around between, I believe it was the Bulls and then the Hawks last year. So you've got different guys to take a look at. Aaron Nesmith is a potential young shooter. Romeo Langford has been hanging around in the wings here. Peyton Pritchard gave them good minutes. I don't see a single guy on that roster where I go, ooh, what is he doing there? I think every single one is worth a look. It's just, how does this all fit?
Yeah.
And what is the identity of this team? And again, it's scary that you don't have an answer to it, but it also could be promising in that you have a lot of different ways you can go with this, and you might discover something that really works. And suddenly, Boston's hanging out in the 4th seed all year. It's not out of the possibility, but neither is being like the 9th or the 10th seed and barely making the play-in tournament.
Yeah, I was going to say that I don't think the East is so wide open, like we're sort of used to sort of thinking traditionally about this. But I do think that the East has a lot of fluidity in it, right? That, if you get outside the 3 and maybe 4 teams, if you want to throw in Atlanta and that at this point, and I'm, by the way, 4, I'm including the Knicks. If you want to get outside of 3 or 4 best teams that we really feel confident in going the season to be at the top, 4 through 8 and 9 could be really a hodgepodge of teams throughout the season that, we may look 2 months into the season and it'd be completely different 2 months later. I think there's a lot of fluidity in that conference that Boston could be right there to where they could be the 4th seed potentially, but they could be the 9th seed or the 10th seed or just miss out. It's just, we're so I feel like in the dark because of a brand new head coach who's literally not been a head coach, that we've seen and know what this kind of gelling looks like. And that you don't have to force a Kemba Walker into the lineup sometimes, that you don't have to, you can completely give over this team to the new young guns, right? And you can sort of run with what they gave you. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I was clicked the wrong button on mute. No, it absolutely does. And I'm interested to see what the Celtics get out of this. I like all of their top players individually. I like most of the bench players as options. I just don't know what I like or how I can like them all
Right.
together, because I've already seen Smart and Tatum and Brown and Williams together for a couple of seasons, and it just hasn't panned out the way that it should on paper. And that, again, you don't know if it was immaturity and guys will get better. You don't know if it was coaching and Brad Stevens, if it was just the intangibles, or there was certain players that the click wasn't happening with off the court, whatever it was. But we're running out of chances to figure that out before one of these major pieces has to go.
Yeah,
and chances are it's Brown or Smart.
Yeah, I really thought Marcus Smart might have gotten traded this offseason.
I did too.
And the fact that he came back means that, to me, Ime Udoka really likes the guy and thinks that he could be a very important piece here in Boston for the Celtics, and says to me that this core he thinks can do something. like get to the playoffs strongly, something, because the Boston offseason was like it. I mean, no offense, but like it's a lot of small pieces moving, right? Like it's not nothing broke the internet or nothing broke anyone's brains or nothing made you think this was going to be a much better team or a much worse team because of it. It was just a couple of pieces here or there, and you, like I said, we got to wait till opening night to figure out what this team actually might look like. So, final team in the Atlantic Division is the Toronto Basketball Raptors, who are now Kyle Lowry-less because he is now in Miami. But they do have a couple pieces that they have coming back to them, not necessarily from this, but in the offseason. Goran Dragic, Precious Achua. Achua, that's how you say it. I don't like his name. It messes with my brain.
Achua. I think it's Achua.
It's not Achua, it's Achua?
I've heard Achua more often than the other, but I don't know for sure.
Fair enough. Precious Achua. Until if someone says it's differently, then I'm not going to believe them. I'm believing Joe. Precious Achua is on this team. Sam Decker is on this team. Toronto, for a team that's a couple of years removed from a world championship and now is from without the albatross of Kyle Lowry. Will he stay? Will he go? Will he be moved? It's a new team. It's a new time, Toronto. It's a team that finished last in the Atlantic last season. Joel, do you think their offseason gives them any hope?
They're kind of stuck in the middle here. I love the starting lineup. It's all young guys when you think about it. So when you're trying to rebuild and you've already got all 5 of your starting spots locked in with young guys who can play, you're not in a bad spot. Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. are both undersized at each of their positions, but they both absolutely can score. But then up front, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, and Chris Boucher, like that's a switchy, long-armed group. And it's a mobile group that can play above the rim, but also can knock down a jumper here or there. So the backcourt's going to get abused in certain situations, but they're not going to be as it's not going to be as easy to just switch them up in the pick and roll as you would think. And VanVleet really does battle on the defensive end. He's just so small. You want to get a little bit more out of Gary Trent in that regard, but he was brought in to be a gunner, and gunner he shall have to be on this team. So that starting 5 is fine. That's a really nice like rally sort of team where you walk into Toronto on the wrong evening and the Raptors are playing well and they get the crowd behind them. That's a really tough unit, I think, more so than people will give credit for. But I look at the bench, and this is where you see the erosion from the championship year, and this is where they very quickly become obvious that they're stuck in the middle. They might be good enough to make the play-in tournament, which they were not last year. But Goran Dragic, fine enough as a veteran backup point guard. I would like him more in a contending situation than this one, especially if VanVleet goes down with injury and now we got Dragic starting. You're going to be asking too much of an old guy, plus an old guy who's taking minutes from presumably youngsters as you're part of a rebuild. They're caught in the middle here. And then the rest of the bench, it's like, all right, Khem Birch and Precious Achiuwa, each of them can give you like one spot between them. Like that's one other guy, depending on the night and the matchup, and both are worth continuing to develop. Birch is a little bit older at this point, but I do like what he brings. He's a gutty sort of, not any range on him, but he defends, he plays at the rim, he rebounds. He's what you want out of a rotation level big. And Achiuwa's got some skill. I don't see anybody else in that entire bench who is a known commodity at this point. Like Svi Mihailuk has
Right.
bounced around. We've talked about him before. He's supposed to be a shooter. Yuta Watanabe had some promise when he was with the Grizzlies, but didn't get to play a lot. Sam Decker's been out of the league. A lot of these other names, like we don't know much of anything about. They're camp invite G League sort of guys that sound like, NBA 2K just made them up in the randomizer. Like that's just where Toronto is. So they don't have any depth if a major piece goes down. They don't have enough depth for a 7-game series. And they may not have enough depth just down the stretch of a long season, like you said, in an Eastern Conference where there really aren't many doormats left. Like, I don't know if there's any true doormats except for maybe Orlando, depending on their injury situation. Everybody else is
What about
give you
Detroit?
a game.
Well,
I'm a little higher on Detroit's like youth and what they have there, where I don't think them or Cleveland is like a guaranteed win anymore.
but you think Orlando more so is?
I think Orlando probably is the only one where I would go, yeah, you better beat them every single time. Right. Detroit and Cleveland, it's like you would think you should beat them, but if they steal a game from you, you're going to go, all right, the young kids can play. I mean, we got to respect them as an opponent.
What about this version? What about this year's version of the Wizards?
As long as Bradley Beal is there, and the fact that like I think Avija and Hachimura and Gafford up front, like there's something there. Spencer Dinwiddie, a lot depends on his health. Like Washington could implode, and they could easily be the worst team in the East, depending on the health situation, what happens with Bradley Beal. Okay. But they're also like very fringe. I think they're probably at the same level as the Raptors, where they're fringe play in tournament material again.
Okay. Okay. So, Joel, before we get out of here, we got to pick the order of finish. Joel, do you want me to go first this time?
Go for it.
The Knicks first. Clearly, they have loaded up this offseason. But let me ask you this just briefly, right?
You're putting your credibility last in the order, right?
Bruh.
Credibility comes sixth in this order. All
right. 30 seconds or less on this. What kind of result would the Knicks need to become a destination? Like they become a laughingstock for a while, and there was the LeBron thought when he might go. Then there was
overachieve, and get a top 3 seed. Like probably the third is realistic, and win a playoff series. Do that, and guys will start looking at you.
Yeah, and I wonder if it would be another couple of seasons after that, because I think there's a lot of players who just would not want to play with Tom Thibodeau. So
very true.
So anyway, so first, I think Joel, I'm going to be honest with you. I think this ends the exact same way it ended last season. I think it's Philly, Brooklyn, New York, Boston, Toronto.
Wow. All right. Yeah. I'm going to go Brooklyn first, Philly second, Boston third, New York fourth. No, I'm not hating. Jerk. I'm not hating.
You are.
And then the Raptors fifth.
You just sat there and told me like you have no idea about Boston, but they're definitely better than the Knicks.
Not definitely better.
Get out of here. What do you mean definitely? You just picked them ahead of the Knicks.
I go back and forth on that one a lot, but there is something about Tom Thibodeau over the last few seasons and stops that first year goes great, and then stuff starts to hit the fan in year 2. And I'm hoping that I'm wrong. Arky, I'm telling you, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that New York finishes ahead of Boston. I hope that I have to eat crow because I like the Knicks as a team better than I like the Celtics. But that is the level of my apprehension with Tom Thibodeau, and it comes from having seen it firsthand.
He fixed it. It's all good. It's all good. I talked to him. He gave me a few minutes in between, like looking at his stamps collection and getting ready for like some more film review. Instead, I fixed it. Arky, we're good. We're good. People are going to be worried. People are going to be very low on us compared to what we were last year. Buy us low, sell us high, baby. Exact words, by the way. Exact words. So
that's the Bill Walton episode, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, all those places. Tell a friend, like, share, subscribe. Help us out. We really appreciate all of you. And we'll see you next week. Arky, Shea, what division are we doing on our next preview?
Joe,
put you on the spot here. It's got to be in the West, right?
We're not doing divisions anymore. We're done with divisions. We're completely done. We haven't done the Northwest division yet, which is your division.
All right.
By the way, I just saw real quick the breaking news, and Michael Porter Jr. just signed a 5-year, $172 million max deal.
Good for him, for a guy that had all those health problems coming in. Now, hopefully, he stays healthy and helps get him and Jamal Murray got to stay healthy and get those Nuggets where they need to be with Jokic. We'll talk about them next week.
Could be $202 million if he makes All NBA. So, couldn't happen to a better guy. I guess I don't know him. I don't know the man. So it's just what you're supposed to say, right?
Right.
All right. See you, Joel.
Bye, everybody.